Drones are everywhere this week, in cinemas with the new Ethan Hawke film Good Kill and an acclaimed documentary, Drone. And of course, drones are hovering over Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen and Somalia too, under the remote control of operators sitting thousands of miles away. Virginia, New Mexico, Nevada, California, Texas, and here in the UK, in Lincolnshire, at RAF Waddington. Well, some unmanned aerial vehicles just gather intelligence, but others, the predators and reapers, can be armed and they can shoot to kill. Sometimes drones don't hit the right people. By November last year, according to the human rights organisation Reprieve, 47 men were specific targets of US drone strikes, which actually killed 1,147 people, many women and children. Is it morally right to deploy armed drones? Peter Lee. Hi, Peter.
Morning.
Ethics and Political Theory at Portsmouth University. You were a chaplain, weren't you, in Iraq in the early 2000s?
Yep.
Yeah. You saw the horror of war. You saw people blown to pieces. Drones blow people to pieces. Civilians as well. Shouldn't they be condemned?
Drones are like any other weapon of war. They can be used, they are designed to kill people, but they can be used for good or evil, depending on government policy. So if you take some of the American policy in Yemen, Pakistan in recent years, morally heinous, should be criticised vehemently. However, that's not the only way that Reaper is used. For example, the British with the Royal Air Force, use of Reaper in Afghanistan and currently in Iraq against IS, an obsession with zero civilian casualties because it's politically unacceptable in the UK, so the RAF operate to a very different standard to the American CIA.
You can't be sure. I mean, the PR that we're told is that they are specific and they are precise. But, you know, a lot of civilians have been killed.
They are specific. They can choose what window of a building they're going to put it in. But if the government says you can take out the whole building, like the American government has, then they kill the whole building. If you say, as happens in the UK, you may not shoot that target, that terrorist or insurgent or Taliban member, if a civilian is going to die, then you just don't shoot them, and therefore you don't kill civilians. So it comes down to how the armed forces execute government policies. So they can be as discriminating as you want them to be, or as indiscriminate as you want them to be. So, for example, I don't want them killing civilians in Yemen or elsewhere. I do want the British, the Royal Air Force, the Reapers, observing IS fighters in Iraq right now. I want them observing, I want them helping Iraqi soldiers on the ground reclaim their country from a group that are raping thousands of girls, killing many women, throwing gay men from buildings to kill them. I want the British Reaper to be involved in protecting Iraqis from that monstrosity, while also I want governments in the West not to be using these machines to kill innocent civilians.
So Kat Craig from Reprieve, in 1 second please, Kat Craig from Reprieve, I'll come to the audience. I'm sure audience have lots to say about this. Kat, we're always going to have warfare. Surely this is, drones are the lesser of, well, quite a few evils, aren't they?
Well, I agree with Dr. Lee that it's really about the application of the technology. Reprieve, as a legal action charity, carries out lots of investigative work. I go to Yemen, to Pakistan to gather evidence about human rights abuses. And I don't hear about drones saving lives. I speak to the father of 9-year-old Abdulaziz, who was going home from school at about 3:30 in the afternoon, and as he went into the village, 5 Hellfire missiles rained down on him, and his mother hasn't spoken for 9 months because all she found was his charred body. I speak to the devastated family of a brave man in Yemen who was a preacher who was speaking out against Al-Qaeda. On a Friday, he used his sermon to dissuade young men from turning to extremism. And on the Tuesday, he was killed in a drone strike. So there's a very large number of civilian casualties. But in addition to that, because the decision-making behind drone strikes is so opaque, there's such a lack of transparency, people on the ground have no idea why people are being targeted and how to keep themselves safe. And
so what is the feeling from the ground, then, as these things hover?
Well, drones can hover overhead 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the evidence that we gather time after time on the ground is that people living in these communities, in these villages, fear for their lives every day. Mothers who say goodbye to their children who don't know if they're going to see them again. People who fear to go to a wedding after a wedding was targeted in a drone strike. People who don't dare to go to the market because they don't know if the person next to them may or may not be killed. And that's because there is no clarity, there's no judicial oversight about drone strikes, but there's also no public ventilation of any evidence that leads to a drone strike. And that's one of the issues for both the US and the UK, which is that the intelligence that leads to drone strikes, as long as it's behind closed doors, cannot be tested, and the strike is only as accurate as the information upon which it's based.
David, make the case for drones. Because it sounds, from what, if I may, from what Kat said, it sounds like a kind of form of terrorism, you know, randomly striking, intimidation, killing of civilians.
Well, I think I would agree with Peter that drones are just a machine of war. There are many ways of delivering lethal force to a target. And we have laws of war, and we have a code of conduct in the just war doctrine, which helps to hopefully ensure that civilian casualties are kept to a minimum and hopefully eradicated completely.
But we're not actually at war with some of these countries.
Well, it depends on your definition of war. I mean, I think what I would say in terms of drones is that, again, they can be used irresponsibly, but they can be used very responsibly.
Doesn't Geneva have a definition of war?
Well, there are laws of war...
which don't apply to Yemen or Pakistan, significantly. Those are not countries with whom the UK is formally at war.
Well, I would define war as simply the use of military power to achieve a policy effect. And since 9/11, the notion of self-defence has been expanded into the notion of preemptive self-defence, that you have to attack terrorist bases before they can hatch plots to attack you in your home country. What I would say about drones, though, is that they have some characteristics, and I agree that they have characteristics that can be misused, but they have some characteristics that actually can make them more morally justifiable. The fact that they can loiter over a target for 24 hours or 36 hours, for example, an individual drone, does allow them to gather lots of intelligence on the target, to try to ensure that that is the correct target, to try to ensure that there are no civilian targets nearby. So they can be a very discriminating use of force. But let me say this, they're not a silver bullet. They don't solve the problems of counterinsurgency or counterterrorism. That's a much more
Are they the most
complex
moral option, if you like, available in this type of warfare, as you put it?
Not necessarily the most moral, but again, if used responsibly, they can be part of an overall campaign which can must take into consideration moral components. But also part of a counterinsurgency campaign is things like hearts and minds, building sort of secure and stable political and social environments. They're just one part of that.
Chris Woods.
The CIA...
The hearts and minds point is interesting.
Hearts and minds, you can't really build hearts and minds when your only focus is killing terrorists. The problem we've got with armed drones is that the CIA developed the rule book. In Pakistan, where they first started using these drones heavily, the CIA was killing people they said were terrorists. There was no... we don't know why these people were chosen. We don't know why they were selected. We know a lot of civilians died. We think somewhere between 400 and 500 civilians were probably killed in a 4 or 5 year period. But the CIA created this fantasy that they started telling us that they weren't killing any civilians at all. It was completely delusional, actually. But then when we started investigating them, we found it was even worse than that. They weren't just killing civilians, they were carrying out certain practices in places like Pakistan, which we want to talk about morality, were horrific. They were bombing rescuers, for example. So they'd bomb a building, and then when people in the village came forward to rescue the dead and injured, the CIA would come back and bomb them again.
I mean, I've looked at some of the figures of the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, which I think is quite a well-respected source on CIA drone operations. And it seems to have been, for example, in Pakistan, there seems to have been a big change since the new rules of engagement were brought in 2012. President Obama was concerned, rightly, about the civilian casualties from CIA drone operations. And so he brought in stricter rules of engagement. Now, according to the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, which is an independent body, in 2013, 2014 and the first month of 2015, there have been no confirmed civilian deaths from CIA drone strikes in Pakistan.
But we could talk about, let's talk about Iraq and Syria today. So we've got British and American drones bombing in Iraq and Syria today, as Peter said. I spoke to CENTCOM last week. They're still claiming 10,000 bombs we dropped in Iraq and Syria. they're still saying we haven't killed a single civilian in those bombings. It's ludicrous. This is, I don't think drones are necessarily making us safer. I think they're actually putting us more at risk.
I think
because we're buying this fantasy that these are safe wars that don't put us at risk.
I think, Nicky, we're continually conflating what the United States is doing with what the United Kingdom's doing. The United Kingdom is not involved bombing anything in Syria. The government's quite clear. The UK is involved in bombing in Iraq, if striking at all, as part of strikes with drones, but also with conventional aircraft.
So they're trigger happy, we're responsible. Is that what you're saying?
Now, this is a fundamental point is the Americans are at war in the way that the British are not at war. So we operate differently, and please don't suggest that they're operating
Peter, we
the same
don't
way.
actually know the rules Britain's operating its drones under in Iraq right
No,
now. We know what they were for Afghanistan. They won't tell us what
they operate the same rules of engagement.
You can't know that, Peter.
Yes, the government will quite happily say that they're involved.
No, they won't. We've asked them, and they won't.
They won't give you specific, but they will tell you that the rules of engagement are the same for drones as every other aircraft.
We're not better at war. We're not special as British people that mean that we don't kill civilians in war. This is a
there's an
fantasy.
obsession. I research with the RAF drone operators. I've sat in the boxes at Creech. I've sat up at Waddington. I spent a lot of hours with it. I've got 30,000 words of comment from these people. They are obsessed with not killing civilians, not just because government says no, not just because RAF says no. And one of the best quotes I got was, I said to somebody, why are you so concerned? Why does it matter? No one's ever going to find out. And he said, well, it keeps the boss happy, the lawyers happy, and it helps me sleep at night. Do we think that we somehow have a random group of sociopaths in the United Kingdom?
We're just saying that you're...
There's a legal requirement to not kill civilians for the British. There's an institutional requirement, and we have human beings who are desperately concerned for others.
Nobody is saying that they are intentionally killing people. The facts on the ground,
I think that's what you have been saying.
Not at all, not at all. What I'm saying is that the consequence, intended or unintended, is a large number of civilian casualties. And it's wrong to say that the UK is not involved. It's wrong to say that the UK is not involved. UK provides locational intelligence. We have been paid £100 million over 3 years by the US government. It's in the Snowden leaks to provide intelligence that includes metadata. And the head of the CIA has said metadata is used to carry out strikes. We have a US base here, which is crucial to drones operations. The president of Yemen, President Hadi, has said that there is an operational base in Yemen with US, UK, Yemeni forces there who decide on the targeting. It is simply wrong to say that the UK does not bear responsibility, not only for its own actions, but the actions of the United States and countries with whom we are not at war.
So the UK is its brother's keeper.
There is no clarity about why we're targeting people. What Reprieve has always asked for is clarity, better guidelines, transparency and openness.
No, I agree there should be better. I agree.
On the transparency, well, let's hear from the audience. Anyone in the
audience
audience who would like to make a point on this, please do put your hand up. We've got a gentleman there with a yellow tie. Good morning.
Good morning.
Quick points.
I remember the Iraq War, and there were an awful lot of casualties through something known as friendly fire. Why it's called friendly, we don't know. And these were American pilots who will never be held to account for what they did. And if you cannot do it correctly when you're in charge of a plane, how can you do it on an unmanned?
Okay, and you had two people there. First of all, in the white top. Hi.
Hi. I just have a simple question to ask everybody who might have a lot more to say about this. How do we consider war and morality to go hand in hand anyway? It's at the end of the day, war is about killing people. What moral conduct are we trying to...
About defending people as well? The concept of a just war?
Well, the concept of a just war would be you're defending people because somebody else is trying to kill people.
Yeah.
Right? So, at the end of the day, there is death in war. And there is no moral way of death if people are going to kill people. So, whether they're going to do it with an AK-47 to your face or they're going to do it with a drone strike, they're going to do it.
Morality is the wrong word. So how do you, let me take it to Kat, how do you degrade and destroy the likes of so-called IS? How would you do it?
Nobody's denying that this is a complex problem and it's a difficult thing that the government faces.
So what's your answer?
My answer is that I don't think that the default position is that we bomb people. I think we have to be braver, more courageous about this.
What drones do is observation. It's not bombing, it's observation to tell the Iraqis on the ground, the soldiers.
And Dr. Lee, I absolutely agree with you that there are useful applications that can save lives. My concern is in relation to drones that there is no transparency and accountability, that the government is not being clear with us where they're being used. And every single think tank, you don't have to listen to Reprieve, you can listen to middle-of-the-road think tanks, will say that there are two causes for terrorism. One of them is foreign policy, which is perceived as unjust, where the rule of law is not adhered to. And the second one, where you try and solve terrorism, is looking to moderate voices within the community.
And toxic theology.
Yeah, and I would go back to the anti-Al-Qaeda imam, my client's brother, who was killed in a drone strike. These are exactly the type of people that we should be befriending. And I think as Britain, we should have faith and courage in the beliefs and the principles that we espouse in democracy, in the rule of law, and we should practice what we preach on that front. And I think that that will make us safer, whereas drones risk making us more at risk.
What Kat's saying here, you're absolutely right. There are lots of non-violent methods that we must use to counter terrorism. I absolutely agree with that. But whether it's insurgents or terrorists, they bring with them a security threat that has to be dealt with. You know, one of the classic components of a successful counter-terrorism campaign or counter-insurgency campaign is providing physical security amongst the population. You must secure the population. You must defeat the insurgents and the terrorists. Otherwise, they have free reign.
But the point of Zarqawi, he was the Al-Qaeda in Iraq man. I think he was killed something like 2006, if I remember right. Thank you, Chris. And he basically was the guy who set so-called ISIS up and running. That was really after his death, because there was martyrdom. He's now celebrated, and his death didn't dampen the danger. It lit the fire. That's the problem. And it was a drone that found him.
It was a drone that found him. It was an F-16 that killed him then, but it was drones that found him tracked. Can I say more recently?
Just one point to David. So you take these out, and more come out of the swamp because of the fact that they've been killed.
These are very protracted campaigns that, again, are not won just by bombing, not won just by killing.
Well, he was the top man.
But we don't do the follow-up. We don't. We go and we bomb, and then we run away again. I agree. So we can look at Libya just a few years ago. It was Britain that wanted that war against Gaddafi. We went in just from the air. We destroyed Gaddafi, and then we walked away. Now, Libya today is a disaster zone.
It sounds like
Yemen isn't the,
okay, Peter,
there's a great deal of overlap. I think we agree that there is probably some security use of force dimension necessary. Definitely need use of law and rights and protecting of humans. Absolutely necessary. So we're often looking at where that line is drawn. But in terms of actual use of drones, it provides an alternative to larger, heavier, more destructive aircraft. And if you look at how many, and I keep going back to, don't conflate what the British and the Americans are doing, they're doing different things. Jihadi John has killed more innocent civilians with a blade of a knife than the British has killed civilians with a drone strike. And that's true.
Can I just say as well?
Just one man.
Chris is absolutely right. Before you use military power, what you must first do is identify what are your objectives when you're going to use military power, and how do you achieve them in the long run. And I think he's absolutely right that what we haven't done very well in the United States and the United Kingdom is actually have a long-term, realisable strategy, clear objectives. And it's absolutely essential.
Hearts and minds are so important, isn't it?
Of course it is.
Look at, near our shores, our own shores, at Bloody Sunday, look at the justifiable grievance because of the civilian loss of life that caused over the years.
Yes.
Look at the recruiting sergeant that it came to be for republicanism. I mean, are these factors taken into consideration, Peter?
I think hearts and minds, you can't bomb your way to someone's sympathy, but people forget that months before the UK joined the anti-IS operation in Iraq, the current and previous Iraqi prime ministers were pleading with David Cameron and Barack Obama to send in the drones, because they offer this combination of intelligence gathering, which they need to do, and protection for the Iraqi soldiers on the ground. And make no mistake, whatever's going to come out of Iraq, it has to be Iraqis and others in that region that make their own peace. All we can do now is hopefully contribute something positive while not doing too much destruction and causing more harm and more negatives in the long term. But I do think we have a role to play.
I think we're buying into this fantasy that drones are making the world safer. What they're actually doing is lowering the threshold at which we enter wars. You think of the number of wars Britain has been dragged into just in the last 10 years. We keep getting put in and we keep getting told it's fine. There's less risk. There is less risk to our pilots and operators, it's true, because they're not physically flying these planes. But the risk and the violence is simply being displaced onto these places that we're bombing. And our politicians aren't taking the risks either. They are doing these things for show sometimes, and then they're not owning the consequences of the disastrous things that are sometimes happening. Libya at the moment is split between...
the unprecedented almost evil of IS, of ISIS.
It is horrific. It is horrific.
If you can degrade them in any way,
I think
with drones,
there are real moral questions around engaging Islamic State. Yes, but we don't ever hear, for example, the discussion that Islamic State came directly out of the disastrous British and American invasion of Iraq back in 2003. Yeah. We are
but
partly
for years
responsible.
Before that, there's been a seedbed of Sunni Shia sectarianism.
There has, absolutely. And in Syria, where the Americans are bombing.
Can you really blame somebody beheading people and videos of children beheading people and playing with decapitated heads in the street on British foreign policy?
No,
Can you blame Boko Haram and British foreign policy?
I think that what we're in at the moment is a position where the world is being pushed to extremes, and a lot of what we're doing is actually making that worse, not necessarily better.
We are being pushed to extremes, and I think we do need to tread very carefully. But I would like to make a point about the human suffering. People forget that there are humans on both sides of the drone. There are the humans that are talked about. I think we've spoken an awful lot about those who are killed, but we don't spend a lot of time thinking about those who are operating, those who sit for hours and make decisions of life and death, that then have to, as the gentleman said, go home and see their families. We have people who now, there are post-traumatic stress disorders amongst Reaper operators because of the things that they have to do. And some of that is not caused by killing people. Some of that is actually caused just by observing violence on the ground and not joining in the fight and having to restrain and not use violence and use lethal force and seeing these terrible things. So remember, there are humans at this side as well. And I'm thinking again about the British side, that we as a country, we ask these people to do this for us, whether we like what they do or not. We have a national obligation to look after them.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.